It started as a normal morning on the pier of Puerto de la Cruz. Cloudy skies, restless waves, and tourists gathering to film the approaching storm. No one suspected that beneath the surface, the ocean was already preparing its first blow. The water grew unnaturally still. Birds lifted from the shoreline. And then, without warning, the sea rose like something alive. A deep, thunderous vibration shook the pier as a massive surge burst upward, launching over the seawall and slamming into the walkway with brutal force. People screamed as the wave tore across the concrete. Backpacks vanished. Railings bent. 10 tourists were ripped from the pier and hurled into the violent sea below, swallowed by churning water that erased the line between air and ocean. A father clung to a light post with one arm reaching for his daughter as the surge dragged her away. Rescue crews sprinted forward, throwing ropes into water so chaotic it looked alive. This wasn't a freak wave. It was the first strike of Storm Claudia, and it hit without mercy. While chaos unfolded on the pier, the true source of danger was still far out at sea, gathering strength in the deep Atlantic. It began as a cluster of ordinary storms drifting over warm waters, nothing unusual for the season. But then the atmosphere shifted. Heat rose from the ocean like breath from a beast. Clouds thickened and spiraled, pulled together as if by invisible hands. Satellite images, once calm and gray, suddenly showed towering columns exploding upward and twisting into a rotating core. Meteorologists stared at the data in disbelief. Pressure was dropping at an unnatural speed. Wind fields doubled in size within hours. The storm wasn't wandering. It was organizing, tightening like a clenched fist. By late night, the system had transformed into a massive, rotating engine stretching hundreds of miles across the Atlantic. Its outer bands reached far ahead of the storm, sending rogue waves toward the Canary Islands long before the eye ever approached. Forecast models updated simultaneously, and every single one pointed to the same path. Claudia wasn't just forming. It was awakening, and the Canary Islands were directly in its crosshairs. By the time Claudia reached the Canary Islands, it no longer resembled a storm. It was a moving wall of wind and water. The first blasts hit Tenerife before sunrise. Wind slammed into the coastline with a force that snapped palm trunks like they were brittle sticks. Metal signs twisted in midair. Rooftops peeled away as if someone were ripping pages from a book. Then came the rain. Not a downpour, an assault. Sheets of water slashed sideways across the streets, drowning visibility and turning entire neighborhoods into swirling brown currents. Power lines sparked violently before collapsing into the flood. One final flicker, and the island fell into total blackout. Emergency crews tried to push through the chaos, but landslides thundered down mountain roads, blocking access to flooded towns. Vehicles stalled, sirens blared. In Gran Canaria, waves towered over the breakwaters, crashing into apartment buildings and rushing into seaside markets where only hours earlier people were eating breakfast. Doors buckled under pressure. Windows exploded outward. Trees ripped from the ground and tumbled through the streets. Claudia wasn't arriving. It was invading, overwhelming the islands with the strength of a natural siege. As Claudia hammered the islands, the ocean became the most treacherous enemy of all. At Puerto de la Cruz, dozens of tourists stood along the seawall believing they were at a safe distance, filming the massive waves that slammed into the coast. The wind roared. The water churned. But nothing prepared them for what came next. A deep rumble rose from beneath the surface, a vibration that could be felt before it was heard. Then the sea erupted. A colossal surge launched over the barrier, smashing into the pier so violently that 10 people were instantly swept off their feet and dragged into the roaring water below. Screams echoed across the harbor. A woman vanished beneath the foam before rescuers could take a single step. Others clawed at the slick concrete, trying desperately to hold on as the current ripped them away. And the nightmare didn't end there. On a beach near Taganana, 6 French tourists were struck by another rogue wave, not swimming, not taking risks, simply walking along the shoreline when the ocean rose without warning and pulled them under. Claudia's waves weren't random or reckless. They were precise, sudden, and merciless, turning the coastline into a deadly trap. As the waves swallowed the coastline and winds tore through the cities, the Canary Islands faced a second crisis, the collapse of their infrastructure. Mountain roads, once scenic routes winding through cliffs and forests, began to crumble under the relentless downpour. Entire sections of asphalt slid down the slopes, taking guardrail signs and even parked cars with them. Emergency vehicles raced toward high-risk areas, only to be turned back by walls of mud and fallen rock. Down in the towns, the storm overpowered the drainage systems. Manholes burst open, spewing muddy water into homes and underground garages. Shops filled in minutes. Furniture floated. Electrical outlets hissed under the rising floodwater. In Gran Canaria, 5 major highways were shut down as fallen trees tangled with power lines, creating zones too dangerous to enter. Firefighters worked in waist-deep water chainsaws in hand, trying to carve passages through blocked streets. Meanwhile, the 112 emergency hotline collapsed under the volume of calls. Nearly every line lit up at once reports of injuries, trapped families, missing people, collapsing roofs. And then the islands dimmed once more. Transformers blew across Tenerife, plunging entire districts into blackness. Claudia was not just attacking the landscape, it was dismantling the systems people depended on to survive. As evening fell over the Canary Islands, the storm changed. What had been a violent cyclone became something far more unsettling, a night ruled by darkness and lightning. Rain hammered rooftops like fists. Wind howled through alleys, bending streetlights until they snapped. And in the sky above the coast, a barrage of lightning more than 200 strikes in minutes lit the horizon like a battlefield. Residents pressed against shuttered windows, watching flashes of white-blue fire tear across the clouds. Each bolt struck the ocean with a sound like exploding steel. Emergency crews moved cautiously. Roads were now rivers. Cliffs were unstable, and every rumble of thunder threatened another landslide. In Lanzarote, ports shut down completely as lightning crawled across the water, striking cranes docks and even the breakwater. A single hit could turn standing water into a death trap. On the hilltops of Tenerife, the view was surreal, the island flickering in and out of existence as power grids failed and lightning illuminated entire valleys at once. Children cried in darkened rooms. Families gathered by candlelight radios hissing with emergency warnings. It was the kind of night that felt endless, a night where every flash of lightning revealed a storm growing stronger, not weaker. When dawn finally broke, it didn't bring relief. It revealed the true scale of the disaster. The first rays of sunlight cut through the mist, glinting off debris that blanketed the coastline like a second shoreline. Boats rested on sidewalks. Cars lay overturned in flooded gardens. Storefronts were gutted, their windows smashed into glittering pools of glass. But the most heartbreaking discoveries came from the water. At Puerto de la Cruz, rescue teams scanned the waves, searching for the 10 people swept away the day before. One woman was found unconscious and pulled ashore, but despite desperate attempts to revive her, she did not survive. Further down the coast at El Cabezo Beach, another tragedy unfolded. A man was recovered from the surf lifeguards performing CPR as the tide surged around their knees, but he too was pronounced dead minutes later. And on the rugged shores of Taganana, helicopters circled above as crews located the French tourists dragged out to sea. One was airlifted to the hospital in serious condition. 4 others were treated for injuries. 1 remained missing. Claudia's destruction wasn't only measured in fallen trees or broken roads, it was counted in lives forever changed.
Look at that. Here comes.
As rescue teams continued searching the coastline and families waited desperately for news of missing loved ones, one truth echoed across the Canary Islands storm. Claudia wasn't just a natural event, it was a reminder of how quickly life can change. The ocean that millions admire for its beauty turned violent in minutes. Waves that once drew tourists became forces strong enough to tear railings, shatter concrete, and sweep people away without hesitation. Yet, through the destruction, something powerful emerged: unity. Neighbors shared food in dark apartments. Fishermen used their own boats to search for survivors. Volunteers formed human chains along flooded streets. Humanity rose where the waters fell. But the lesson remains: storms like Claudia are becoming stronger faster and more unpredictable. The world is changing and preparedness is no longer optional. If this story moved, you don't let it end here. Like this video to push awareness further. Share it so more people learn how dangerous these coastal surges can be. Subscribe for real-time updates on global storms, extreme weather, and survival insights. Because the next storm is already forming somewhere, and awareness is the first step towards surviving it.